Legendary sportscaster Jimmy Roberts has won over a dozen Emmy Awards. He is the author of Breaking the Slump and No One Wins Alone, which he co-authored with NHL Hall of Famer Mark Messier. He's won a Golf Writers Association of America Award, a Metropolitan Golf Association's Distinguished Service Award, the Lincoln Word in Golf Journalism Award from the Met Golf Writers Association, and his last word column in the Met Golfer is a must-read. Tommy Roy once called him a contemporary version of Jack Whitaker, but I call him the voice of golf in the Met. Enjoy my conversation with Jimmy Roberts. Jimmy Roberts, welcome to the Met Golf Writers podcast. Really excited for you to be able to join us.
Yeah, it's good to be here, Anthony. I've been on the board for a while, and I've lived in this area my entire life, with the exception of 4 years in college. So, and I love the game, even if it doesn't always love me back. So I think I've got all the bases covered.
Yeah, I know. I feel the same way. That's for sure. I wanted to. I know you grew up in the Met area, but one of the things I really wanted to talk about to start were your parents and how influential they have been in your life. I get the feeling they've been really influential. Your dad traded securities. Your mom was a school teacher. I'm really curious to understand and get to know how they've influenced you in your early in your life and then throughout your career.
Well, I was fortunate. My parents are no longer alive. My mom passed last year, the week of the Ryder Cup. I was actually in Rome when she passed away. She lived a nice, long, full life. And my dad's been gone since 2007, but they were both enormously influential. I was really fortunate to have been raised in a home the way I was. They were good, decent people. My dad was a veteran, fought in the Second World War, decorated veteran, was involved in some meritorious action that I grew up hearing about. He was an intensely moral man. And I think he left his imprint on me in many, many ways. My mom, you mentioned it, she was a school teacher, taught elementary education, and then went back and got a master's degree just for professional enrichment. You know, I guess when I was in something like 7th or 8th grade, something like that. As it turns out, a lot of my friends that I grew up with had her as a teacher, which was kind of cool.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. And anyway, they were great people. Married for 50 something years. I've got 2 older sisters. We had a pretty tight family. Mm-hmm. And, you know, it was in their home. It's funny. So as I said, I'm one of 3 siblings. I'm the only one who plays golf. Well, my parents did. You know, my dad liked the game. And he had his moments. My mom, she played the game. And again, she had her moments, but I would think it would be fair to them to say that neither of them were extraordinary golfers, but they loved the game. And so as a result, I grew up in a house where they were frequently playing and I would tag along. And that's how I got introduced to the game, at least at first. And then I caddied. And so that brought me closer to the game. And then when I had my first job in the media, which was as a newspaper writer, it was a PM paper. So we would work till 4 a.m. or whatever it was. Then we'd go to the bar where all the newspaper men went, and we'd, have a bite and a drink, and then we'd go out and play golf. And it was a really good life, and I have really fond memories of it. But I had and still have a great family.
Sure. Did you do work for the school paper when you were in high school? Did you write columns for there as well, or do part of the morning announcements and things like that?
I did. I did both. I contributed to the White Plains High School newspaper, the Orange. Mm-hmm. I wasn't a regular contributor, but I did do the morning announcements in high school, and then got involved in doing radio in college. And that was really how I kind of got started in the media. And then I also, while I was in high school and in college, I actually wrote for the Gannett paper, the local commercial newspaper. As it happens, my mother had a volunteer assistant in her classroom when she was a kindergarten teacher. And that woman was, her name was Lisa Furlong, and she was the former editor of Golf Digest magazine.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So anyway, I got hired to work in the local newspaper. And well, do I have that right? Was it Golf Digest, or was she with, my goodness, it's so long ago. Or did she work for the Westchester? No, I got this wrong. She worked for the Westchester newspapers. What a terrible mistake to have made. Anyway, so that's how I got the job. I was working as a stringer, and I was typing agate scores, things that are long since become obsolete. But you'd go and I'd call up high school coaches and get the box scores for the basketball games, and do all of the tiny type. There used to be a page in newspapers called the agate page where they had all the box scores and all the statistics. And there were no computers back then. So basically it was a lot of hard labor of just calling people and getting the information and transposing it and typing it up. And I graduated from there to go out and cover important high school games. And then eventually they let me do, a couple of more advanced things. And it was a really great education. I learned a lot from some really, really, talented professionals, and right from the ground up. So I'm again, just a really lucky guy that was the foundation of my professional career.
Well, I think it's a little bit extraordinary that you were able to find a little bit of both your passions so early on. I mean, you did caddy a little bit. I know you've had probably other jobs, but you caddied, so golf was in your life, and then you're working for the school newspaper, or you're doing broadcasting, or doing the morning announcements. Enough. It just seems like you were destined to have both in your life.
Well, it kind of worked out that way. I mean, you know, I golf found me. The way I ended up kind of getting involved in golf to the degree that I have been involved in golf over the last 30 years was when I had my first real job out of college. I worked for ABC Sports. And back then, there is no ABC Sports now, but back then ABC Sports was the big dog in the landscape. And it was the most influential and powerful sports broadcasting entity. And my first 8 years I worked in the industry, I worked on the other side of the camera. As I started as a production assistant, I started as a gopher, a runner, and then got promoted to production assistant, and then to associate producer, and up the chain. Then I worked for ABC News for a couple of years. But those couple of years that I worked for ABC, I was kind of like an entry-level production assistant on their golf package. So that was the golf package that was Jim McKay and Dave Marr and Peter Allis and Bob Rosberg. And we did the US Open and the British Open and the PGA Championship. The only major we didn't have was the Masters. Right. And so I kind of got indoctrinated into the game, just being part of it and being familiar with it and getting to know some people. And then I go to work for ESPN, and they aren't really covering golf. And it quickly becomes apparent to me that if I want to kind of make a mark there, I've got to figure out something where I can stake my claim.
Like a niche.
So
a niche.
Yeah. So I said, let's cover some golf. And, I think there was some reluctance, and they kind of let me do a little bit of it. And then all of a sudden Tiger Woods happened, and that was that.
Yeah.
And golf became a thing, and I was there covering it. And as it happens, it was covering golf and doing stories for ESPN that attracted the attention of Dick Ebersol, who was my boss for many years at NBC. But he came along and came to hire me to work for NBC because Dick Enberg, who was doing golf and doing stories, had left to go to CBS when CBS got the rights to the NFL. So things just kind of fell into place. And, it wasn't my intention,
Okay.
way back when. I mean, if you would have asked me, I would have said, well, I want to cover college basketball. That would have been what I would have wanted to have covered because I was a fan of that always, and then college football. But golf just came along and it was the opportunity, and I was there, and it kind of one thing led to another. And here I am all these years later.
It's unbelievable. When you were at ABC, you mentioned some pretty powerful names there. What was their effect on you? I mean, those are pretty good people that were schooling you and educating you. What did you learn from them? Was it the same thing from everybody, or was it something different? What was their effect on you?
I think it was different from everybody, Anthony. I worked as a writer and producer for Howard Cosell for a couple of years on a show that he had called Sports Beat, and I learned from Howard how important it was to ask the right questions. Howard used to say, "What's popular is not always right. What's right is not always popular." And I've had some instances in my career, plenty of them, where I felt like I asked questions that I felt needed to be asked. Look, any journalist has, and they've cost me relationships, but I kind of felt like I owed it to the people who were sitting on their couches and watching TV. So I learned that kind of what I'd like to call integrity from Howard. I learned from people like Jim McKay and Jack Whitaker, just the importance of the language. And Dick Schaap. I worked for Dick Schaap. People today, they know Jeremy Schaap. Jeremy's father was Dick Schaap, who was a giant of the industry. And I worked as a producer for Dick. And I learned about, storytelling from him. I learned to be curious from people like Jim McKay, that's what really, drives any good reporter, is just to be curious. And I was really, really fortunate. I mean, and another person who nobody's ever heard of now, but for a couple of years, I worked for ABC News, and there was a man there, a correspondent, so talented. He passed away many years ago. His name was Judd Rose. And I was a producer for him. And the way he was able to write scripts and marry picture to words was just masterful. So I was lucky to be around a lot of really, really talented people. And I'd like to think I was smart enough to keep my mouth shut for once in my life and listen to what they had to say and try and learn.
Well, it's interesting you use those words, because that was going to be my next question. Who taught you to be such a good listener?
Well, my mother probably would have told you that I'm still learning. My wife would certainly tell you that, but and my kids don't think I listen at all. But I do think
that's a big club, believe me.
Yeah, I do think that. Look, all of us are a work in progress.
Sure.
And every day I get up and I was just at a conference in Mexico, a sports business conference, because I'm launching a new company as a kind of a side business here. But one of the people who was there and he spoke was Byron Scott, the former NBA coach and LA Laker player. And he was talking about his relationship with Kobe Bryant and how tireless Kobe Bryant was as an athlete and trying to always perfect his craft. Now, this is Kobe Bryant. It's one of the greatest basketball players in history. And yet every day he got up trying to work as hard as he could. And he said that one of the things that Kobe said, and I haven't forgotten this since Byron mentioned it, and I hope I can continue to remember this. He said that Kobe used to get up and he said, every day I get up and I have 24 hours to be better. So I'm just so intrigued by that thought, which means that every day when you open your eyes, it doesn't really matter what happened yesterday, because you've got the day in front of you and you've got 24 hours to be better than you were the day before. And I really, really like that idea. And I don't pretend that I've got a handle on that, but it's sure a great thing to talk, to think about.
Sure.
So, and I think that listening is one of those things one of my biggest complaints when I watch television and I see people who are interviewing other people. I'll give you an example. One of the things that made me crazy. So this was last year. So this would have been the 2024. No, it would have been the 2023 college football season. And Ohio State was playing somebody, I don't really remember who it was, but Ryan Day, the Ohio State coach, came off the field at halftime for one of those obligatory interviews. And there was the interviewer asks him some canned question, or it's just some, listen, I'm sure this person thought it was thoughtful, asked this question, but Ryan Day was having none of it. He might have given some perfunctory answer, but then he said, but I want to tell you something. What just happened out there, and you saw it, what just happened, what we just experienced in the last minute of that first half, that was wrong. That shouldn't have happened. Something, I'm angry about that, and I'm going to talk to somebody about that. And what do you think the reporter's next question was? Or what should it have been?
Why are you so upset? What was
exactly what happened?
Right.
But the reporter didn't ask that. The reporter asked some question about the offensive line.
Right.
Principle one, I've talked to a bunch of kids who are aspiring reporters and journalists, and job one, there's a reason, and it's a cliche and it's old. There's a reason God gave you two ears and one mouth.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Listen twice as much as you talk.
Yeah.
But I don't think we do enough of that. No. And I think as journalists, we certainly should.
Yeah. And that was one of the things that I would have thought you got from, like, and not that your dad didn't, but your mom, as being a teacher, she was understanding the power of listening and the power of words. And I feel like that's why, and I'm not just attributing everything to her, but I just feel like that's why it's so natural to you, because you understand the power of language and the power of listening to what somebody, and being present when somebody's talking.
Yeah, well, I mean, we aspire to do that. Hopefully, nobody bats 1,000, but I'd like to think that, the people that you're talking to, they're the greatest wealth. Too many people, and I've been a victim of this myself. You go in, you want to be ultra prepared, and you write down a list of 20 questions, and somebody says something, and then, when I shot my brother when I was 6, I think that had a big impact on me. But, I always was a good writer. Well, excuse me, you shot your brother when you were 6? And,
right.
The whole idea of being curious, getting back to Jim McKay, that's what makes for a good journalist. I've just always had a lot of questions. My wife says that I don't talk to people, I interview them. I'm curious about people. And I think that for all of my other failings intellectually and academically, one of the blessings I have is that I'm curious, and I like to hear people's stories.
Yeah. Does that help you write the you do the last word in the Met Golfer? Is that sort of what helps you? Is that part of you being curious?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I just, I love a good story.
Yeah.
And most of my columns over the years, I think I've been doing that Bethpage for, it seems like 20 years now. I don't know when I started.
It's got to be close to 20 years that I've been.
Yeah. I like a good story, and those are mostly whimsical. I mean, that's one of my favorite things that I've ever had the opportunity to do, because the people at Met Golfer have always been so great about just basically giving me free reign. What do you want to write about is the way the conversation at the beginning of, every month or every period of time when I need to write a column. It's what's on your mind.
Yeah.
And that's really quite an opportunity. And I've had some columns over the years that have been a lot of fun to write. A lot.
I've enjoyed all of them, to be honest with you. I mean, I look forward, not to sound too corny, but I mean, I also grew up reading the back page of Sports Illustrated and enjoying that column. And now I feel like I have a golf version of that. So that's why, personally, why I enjoy it. You recently talked about in the last word, Rory and his accomplishment, and now we've gotten to this point where him and Colin Morikawa has made some comments about talking to the media. Shane Lowry had a couple weeks back had a comment about talking to the media. As a veteran journalist, I know, and who's been a part of other sports, not that where it's almost an obligation. Where do you fall on what's been going on? This sort of animosity between some players in the PGA Tour and the media.
It's complicated. I have always really liked and respected Rory, and I just love how he's made himself available, and I think it's been something that's been good for him.
Definitely.
I think he's benefited from that, and I don't know. I really cringed when Colin Morikawa said, "I don't know anybody anything."
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, that's the way you feel. Okay, we now know a little something about you.
Right.
Um, you're certainly entitled to to your feelings, but I just don't understand who's done him wrong. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I get that he was disappointed at Bay Hill when he got, passed at the end and, you know, and lost when he thought he was going to win.
Hmm.
Maybe there should be some kind of a cooling off period. I don't know that was Shane Lowry's idea. I don't think that's a bad idea at all.
No.
I mean, at least if you're a baseball pitcher, you have to wait till the game is over.
Hmm.
You know, um, Golfers are expected to talk right away.
Right.
Um, I'm not comfortable with the way this dialogue is headed.
Yeah.
Now, let me just say this. I do think that there are some folks in our industry who don't cover themselves in glory. And I I think that with the rise of the internet um, and podcasting, quite frankly,
Hmm.
there's so much less accountability. You know, when I was writing for a newspaper, or when I write for a magazine, or when I work on television, there is a filter. There are people now, live television's different. I mean, nobody, if I say something that, is controversial or wrong, I mean, unless it's premeditated,
Hmm.
it's live TV. What are you going to do? But I still have to be responsible for it.
Hmm.
I think that there doesn't seem to be as much, there's not a structure of accountability in a lot of media these days.
Right.
So people can say whatever they want to say, and they're not responsible for it. They can say things and then they can run away.
Yeah.
And, it's not easy being a public figure. And I'm not talking about me, I'm talking about, these golfers.
Sure.
And I think that they may feel that they're subject to unfair criticism. And that's what I'm presuming I hear.
Yes, I understand.
Um, and yeah, that stinks.
Yeah.
But that's the world we live in. And maybe they've got it. Look, maybe they've got it right. And maybe the rules need to change.
Hmm.
Um, but I think it's just a shame because it just seems so typical of how kind of less civil we've become as a society.
Yeah.
You
That's
know,
that's kind of where I was. The landscape has shifted that we're not dialoguing anymore. Everything is becoming talking at each other and not to each other.
I would agree. I mean, or at least if not everybody's doing it, too many people are doing it. And I
Yeah.
think that, I think what you're seeing with people like Lowry and Morikawa and Rory is that they've had enough,
Right.
you know.
Right.
But I don't know. I'm not buying it all. I'm just not buying it all. I here's where I do think that it's unfair to them. They're expected to always be available.
Mm-hmm.
They're expected to always answer for their behavior and their actions. And yet people who criticize them, I think they feel, don't always have to be available
Mm-hmm.
or responsible.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't seem fair, does it?
Right.
Um, I don't know. It gets back to the whole accountability thing.
Right. And then
You know, it
the
drives.
double-edged sword of it, right, where you ask somebody to be accessible and then you criticize them what they're saying, or or you're not being respectful of their point of view. If you don't treat them with respect, then they feel like, well, why am I talking to you? And
Well, there's the whole. Anthony, I think you put your finger on it there with one word: respect.
right.
I mean, it's just the dialogue has become so coarse
Yeah.
in the last 20 years. I mean, it's like, how would you feel if people talked about you like that?
Right.
I mean, I get it. I get that part of it. On the other hand, you know, their fame and fortune doesn't happen in a vacuum. They are tremendously well compensated. And part of it has to do with their celebrity through the media.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just because they can hit a 7-iron,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I listen, I'm not saying that it's tricky. I'm just saying that I think that to say, I don't know anybody, anything, I don't know. I wouldn't want my kids talking like that.
Right. 100%. While we're on the topic of respect, and this is another thing that concerns me, and I wanted to get your opinion on it because you're someone who grew up in the Met area. I am concerned as we talk about this new course world we're living in. I'm concerned about the Ryder Cup at Bethpage,
Me
and
too.
I just don't feel like it's going to be great for New York. I don't think it's going to be great for the sport. I just feel like I understand the excitement and I understand the theater of it, but I don't feel like it's going to play out the way we think it's going to play out. And I'm just concerned that it's going to leave a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths.
I don't think you're wrong about that. I think that I'm terribly concerned about what could happen. I mean, we've seen the partisan nature of what the event has become just escalate over the last, I've been to every Ryder Cup since 1995. And the fans are passionate, but there have been turning points where it made me feel uncomfortable the way people were behaving.
Mm-hmm.
It's one thing to applaud when people miss a putt. That's the way it goes in the Ryder Cup. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
It's another thing, to heckle people in a really hostile way, in a personal way on the golf course. Listen, this is not the NFL. It's just not. This is listen, you can call me silly and you can assign whatever adjective you'd like to me, but the fact of the matter is golf has always been different, and there are a lot of people who like it that way. I'm one of them. I think I like the fact that people can really compete, and then at the end of the day they can kind of shake hands, take up their hat, and say good match.
Yep.
I like that. I think that it is I think there are going to be a lot of people holding their breath to see how, look, as a New Yorker, I'm kind of like, I'm looking through my fingers to look at what's going to happen. And I hope I'm wrong. I really do. But I was there at the US Open in 2002 and in, was it 2009, and at the PGA Championship a couple of years ago. Mm-hmm. And all the things that make Bethpage great make it dangerous to the sport in some ways.
We saw it in 2002, right? There's that famous video of the guy heckling Sergio as he's re-gripping. Like,
yeah.
And now we're and now we're so 20 years later, it's gonna be worse. That's why that
Yeah.
I see you just extrapolate the behavior, and I that's why I'm concerned. I don't think it's gonna be like you said. I think it's dangerous. I think that's a good word.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we'll just hope for the best.
Yeah, yeah. I want to finish up with one thing that I know that's important to you, and as you mentioned earlier, you're on the board at the Met Golf Writers Association. Tell me what you what that organization has come to mean to you, and talk a little bit about the dinner and how special that is.
Listen, um, what it's come to mean to me. So I love the fact that we raise money for caddy scholarships. I think that's a great thing.
Hmm.
And I love the fact that we raise money for a scholarship in the name of Dave Marr at Columbia Journalism School.
Hmm.
Those are the two things that mean most to me. Um, I cut my teeth in this industry as a newspaper reporter under a guy who was one of the greats, a guy named Guido Cribari, and he loved golf. He was the executive sports editor of the Westchester Rockland newspapers. And this was for a long, long time. And Guido used to say it's the golfingest place in the world. There are more golf courses per square mile or per capita than any place else in the world. I don't know if that's true,
Right.
but I do know how important golf is around here, how ubiquitous it is. It's everywhere.
Hmm.
And I think we're fortunate for that. We have some exclusive private clubs. We have great public courses. I mean, people ask me all the time, tell me, what do you think are the best golf courses anywhere? And, while I might tell you that I think National Golf Links is just such an extraordinary place because it is,
Yep.
but so is Bethpage Black.
Yeah.
The fact that, and so is Montauk Downs,
Oh,
I
love
mean,
Montauk.
great public courses.
Yep.
And I love that, golf around here it's part of the fabric. And so working on the board of the Met Golf Writers gives me an opportunity to, to really stay involved in something that I hope remains important for a long, long time,
Hmm.
because I know it's such a source of joy for so many people.
Yep. Absolutely. I mean, yeah, I was talking to another guest previously, and we were talking about the Fellowship of Golf, and I think we all love the Fellowship of Golf, but it's not it's not relegated to just golfers. I mean, the people I've met at the Met Golf in the Met Golf Writers Association and other walks of life. It's been so important to me. These people, these friendships in the industry, whether it's a writer or whether it's Woody Lashin at Pete's Golf, or just meeting you. To be honest with you, has been a highlight. Like I would not be able to be enriched in the ways that I am by meeting the people that I've met.
Well, first of all, that's very nice of you to say thank you. But I have to tell you, for me, this is what it's about. I cannot tell you the people in my life who I've connected with because of golf.
Yeah.
Here's a real quick story. I was an enormous fan of the rock and roll group REM, as a lot of people were. They're rock and roll Hall of Famers. I mean, how many of their songs does so many people know and sing all the time? Still, all these years later after they've broken up, I got to be friendly with one of the members of the band because he was a golfer. And I cannot tell you how many people in my life I have gotten to know because they're golfers,
Yeah.
whether they are rock and roll musicians or one of my favorite stories. I used to, when I was much younger, used to go out to the east end of Long Island for the summers. And the only place that I had an opportunity to play was was Montauk Downs.
Yeah.
Great Robert Trent Jones course in the tip of the island.
So good.
And I would go there as a single and wait. And one day they put me with two Coast Guardsmen because there's a Coast Guard station out there.
Yeah.
Well, they became my friends.
Yeah.
Here I am, like a young guy working in New York City in the concrete jungle. And who do I end up kind of hanging out with for, some of the summer? A couple of Coast Guardsmen, you
Yeah.
know, who were, we were very, very different people, but golf brought us together.
Yeah.
And I love that about the game. I
Yeah.
love that the game is so hard. I wrote a book a few years ago about golf, and I always sign it the same way, which is that golf is a great and terrible game.
Yeah. It is. It is. But if you have the right perspective, that if you're just enjoying the time with the people that you're with, then I don't care how good or how bad I play. I'm there for that that fellowship, that banter, that conversation. That's to me is all part of it, and that's what I love about it.
Yeah, it's funny. My wife has recently taken up golf, but before she did, I'd come home from the golf course and she'd say, who'd you play with today? I played with Bill. What'd you talk about? I'd say, well, I don't remember. We talked about golf, and it doesn't matter if Bill was, you know, uh, a guy who worked at the restaurant down the block,
Right.
somebody who worked on Wall Street,
Yeah.
a musician.
Yeah.
It didn't matter because we didn't talk about any of that. We didn't talk about what I did. We didn't talk about what they did.
Right.
We talked about, that was a great 7-iron. Did you see the shot that Tiger hit last week?
Yeah.
We were all wrapped up in the fellowship of golf, which is kind of hard to explain to somebody
Yeah.
who maybe doesn't play and, isn't infected like the way we all are. But I think anybody who feels that way, they get it.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's a thread we all love to pull on for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And then just finally, the Met Golf Writers Dinner that we hold every
Yeah,
year.
yeah.
That's a pretty amazing night, and that's honored some pretty special people. And we're fortunate again to have another great group this year.
Yep.
Just talk a little bit about that night that we.
Yeah, it's great. Listen, there was a time when being a golf writer meant something different than what it means today. And when the Met Golf Writers Association first started giving out the award, the Gold Tee Award, which is our marquee award, if you look at the banner, it's Ben Hogan, it's Bob Hope, Gerald Ford, some pretty A-list people.
Yeah.
Jack Nicklaus, Arnold Palmer in the game of golf. But times have changed, and an organization of golf writers doesn't play the same role that it once did, and that's something that I think that we as an organization have kind of wrestled with over the last few years. But one of the things that remains the same is that dinner once a year. We get together and we honor people who have done good by the game, for the game, in the game. I love the fact that we have the Mary B. Porter Award. Mary B. was a former professional golfer on the LPGA Tour who, when she was playing an event one year, jumped over a fence and saved somebody who was drowning in a pool. And so we give an award in her name, which honors somebody who has done some humanitarian gesture and connected with golf. And that's always a highlight for me when we're able to kind of recognize people like that. When we recognize a journalist, I think that's a great thing. And we still give the Gold Tee Award out. And this year it's going to Billy Payne, who is the former chairman of Augusta National Golf Club. Mm-hmm. And, Augusta depends on who you ask. There are a lot of people who don't see it the way that I think we see it. But I mean, I'm here to tell you that what Billy Payne did there, he was responsible for so much good societally, organizationally. He was the one who brought Augusta forward in many, many ways. Mm-hmm. And, maybe wasn't at a pace that was satisfactory to some, but I think the headwinds were very, very strong, and he did. And I think that, we've had great honorees like Dottie Pepper, who's just an amazing person.
Yeah.
You know, she's been successful as a player and as a broadcaster, and also just one of the great folks you ever want to know. It's an opportunity to recognize people in the game who've really done good. And it's a wonderful night to be part of.
Well, thank you for being also one of the guys that have done good for the game of golf. On behalf of all those who consumed what you've done over the years, and it's why the Met Golf Writers Association has honored you previously for your work in journalism. Thank you very much for all of that, and thank you very much for your time today.
Anthony, it's a pleasure being with you. Nice to talk.
Yep, absolutely, and hopefully we'll get the opportunity to play some golf and pull on that yarn that we all love to do.
I would like that.
Well, thank you for joining us, folks, and enjoy your day. And once again, thank you to Jimmy Roberts.